What up, YouTube? Before we jump into this most recent video, I got an announcement. We've actually teamed up with Poker Rags to provide our anti-knit poker apparel on their website. Before the end of the month, there will be a 10% coupon code you could use, ANPC, so make sure you hop on that. Obviously, as you can tell, repping the Poker Rags straddle t-shirt made famous by Garrett Adelstein on the Live at the Bike streams. And as you can maybe see here in the backyard, it's actually been redone, which you'll see in the next clip. Was something that we're looking to do. It's on its way, and yeah, moving to the new place has been really nice. Anyway, let's jump into that next video, and be sure to check out DGAF's Poker Sessions podcast, as well as his website, pokerrags.us, and check out our apparel on there as well. All right, catch you guys later. Hi, boys. How you guys doing? Playing on a water table?
No, Ben. Don't pour the water out.
Yeah, well, he's just playing with it, bud. Day 239 of stay at home. Things don't seem to be getting any better anytime soon. Boys here have their own little water table. Been meaning to ramp up and vamp up the backyard. Anyway, let's jump into the next session. Good morning, YouTube. Off to another morning of grinding. It is Friday, the 5th day of my first week of playing every single morning. We will be recapping the end of the session from yesterday, or rather yesterday's session, sorry. So yesterday I came in, 4th day in a row of playing. When I arrived, there is a must-move game. I sit in, and once I got my chips, I sit down. I'm actually going to be the under-the-gun player, and it is a straddle game. So my options are obviously to straddle, or just wait to come in behind the button. You know, my natural instinct is just whatever, come in behind the button, wait. But obviously I also don't want to be a nit. It crosses my mind, like, oh, let's avoid the karmic retribution of avoiding the straddle. Let's put in the straddle, hope to run good. So I straddle to come into the game. There is an open, I think, under the gun plus 1 or 2 to 35. There are 2 callers before the small blind makes it 220. The small blind is an aggressive, good-thinking player. It's somebody who I had joked previously being a spew monkey. I think the first time I played with him, he like 3-bet me like 3 times in an hour or something, and I made some joke about like, oh yeah, you're just being like an aggro spew-tard. Since then, I've seen him like tighten up a ton. I'm not even sure actually that he's like 3-bet me once in the last like 2 weeks or 3 weeks of playing with him regularly. It seems like he's tightened up a lot. That said, when he squeezes here in the small blind, I think he's the one capable player of doing this, you know, lighter than Queens Plus. I don't think he needs to just have like the nuts here. I think he has some like ace-X suited in his range, especially when it goes like open and then 2 calls. The opener is, you know, also a good player, someone that doesn't necessarily just need to be opening the nuts. So it's like a spot where if you can get through him, the other players behind him should be wider. So when it's on me in the straddle and I look down at jacks, I'm like, egad. It's a pretty tough spot, and I go into the tank for quite some time. I don't think I could be 4-betting here. Maybe I could just like 4-bet rip and hope he doesn't wake up to queens. Maybe he folds up queens, obviously never folding ace or kings, and then maybe he folds ace king or snaps it off with ace king when we flip. I don't really like that. I think if I'm going to 4-bet, it's got to be like a 4-bet jam. We don't want to 4-bet to some like goofy amount and make it look like there's fold equity, because if he has a hand like ace king suited, maybe if I make it like 500, maybe he thinks he can jam for 1,000, get me to fold, and now like I can't fold. So I don't really like 4-betting unless it's going to just be a jam, and I think a jam is pretty bad because I'm only going to get called once I'm like crushed. Maybe I can get the flip to fold. There is, what, 220 plus another 100 in there, 330. I just don't think there's enough in there to be just jamming here for the 1,000. So after some time, I elect to just flat, play some pots in position. We are playing $1,000. I don't really love this play necessarily because obviously it doesn't close the action. There is still the original opener to act. He's more than welcome to be, you know, get it in there. It's not like he has some capped range. But anyway, I like to call. It's close, I think. I'm not in love with the play, but that's one I went with. So I call. Now the original opener thinks for a bit, and he just calls. I think when he just calls, he retains some pocket queens, but I think he's way more likely if he has like ace king, aces or kings to just be getting it in pre-flop. Like there's a lot of money in there now that he could just get it in. So I don't think that he's going to have the strongest ranges. I think he now retains some more like pocket pairs, like maybe 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s, jacks. Maybe some like suited connectors, maybe like ace queen suited to play in position. I don't really know like how he constructs his range. I wouldn't expect that, but I think it's gonna be more of the pocket pairs under the jacks. So he calls. Now the next stack goes in the tank playing like a $700 stack, and when he goes in the tank, I actually thought he might be thinking of ripping it, and I was trying to figure out like what do I do. Obviously I think I'd be ahead of his hand strength, but if he rips it and now the small blind rips it, can I call it off? I don't know, maybe I have to just fold because it's way more likely now that one of them is ace king and I'm flipping it best. Anyway, he ends up folding, and now the guy thereafter, I think the last guy to close the action, I think it's the guy closing the action, folds as well. And apparently he folded queens. He said it after the hand. I was just sort of like, look, dude, like I don't want to hear about like what you're pretending to fold. And I showed my neighbors, and they confirmed that he did in fact fold queens. Yeah, I don't really know like what he's really doing here. If he's like flatting on the button with queens and then folding. This is kind of a dream re-squeeze spot because it doesn't look like he has much of a hand. And he should theoretically be ahead of our ranges. Like I'm fairly capped. Like I don't think I'm ever flatting here with aces or kings. And so really he just has to beat the small blinds range. And maybe he doesn't know who the small blind is, but man, I think queens are kind of a slam dunk. Get it in here with all the money that's in there. Anyway, so he folds, and we go 3 ways to a flop where the pot is 660 plus like 100, maybe like 750, something like that. And the flop comes, I think it's 6-6 deuce with 2 clubs. I think it might have been deuce 6 with 2 clubs, but I think it's 6-6 deuce with 2 clubs. And now the small blind checks. When he checks, I feel like he's kind of giving up here. Can he be trapping with aces and kings? Sure. I think if he's trapping, it's much more likely to be aces than it is kings because he doesn't really want it to check through and give like a free card to a possible ace. That said, I think it's, you know, myself and the player behind are heavily weighted to pocket pairs, and if he checks, we're much more likely to be taking a bet here. Like we don't want overcards to come off, so it's a pretty good play with aces. I read the situation as I have the best hand now, so I bet 310, leaving myself with 470, I think it is. Maybe I should bet a little bit larger so that it looks like there's really no fold equity, in case somebody wants to get crazy with like ace king. But anyway, that's the sizing I went with. I went with like about a half pot bet. Maybe I should go a little bit larger, like 380, 400, so that when I'm left with like whatever 400, nobody thinks I'm ever folding for a min raise. I bet 310. The player thereafter folds. Apparently he had pocket 7s, so I was pretty close to my read of him having like 7s through jacks. So he folds, and now the small blind jams it in pretty quickly. Yeah, pretty annoying. When he does this, I figure that I'm now behind because it doesn't look like really there's any fold equity. 470 is like 100 big blinds, so maybe he thinks he has that. Maybe he has like, you know, ace king suited for a backdoor flush draw, or just the natural flush draw. Although if he has ace, I think I have the jack of clubs, which is also one of the reasons I bet. Having the jack of clubs, I do have like the added equity of a backdoor flush draw if it comes club. So maybe he has ace king of clubs, although I would expect him to just bet ace king of clubs here because if somebody else bets large enough, then now they're committed, and I think he'd rather just be putting the onus on us. So I don't think he's gonna have ace king of clubs that often. That said, I think the pot's just too big. I think again this player is capable of getting out of lines with some worse hands. I think that I've essentially committed myself with this bet. When I bet this amount, I was committing myself. That's what I knew I was doing. So I have no intention of folding. So though I feel like, you know, he's going to wake up to aces here, some percentage of the time, I am not folding. Obviously I'm hoping that the backdoor clubs are live, and I would assume the jack is live. So I call it off. The turn's an ace, and he instantly turns over ace king offsuit. The river's a brick, and he scoops his pot. Pretty frustrating because, you know, out of anybody else, I don't really mind the play. Like, whatever, it is what it is. But out of this guy, like, it kind of annoyed me because I think he's good, and I think he should have some understanding of like not really having any fold equity. I think afterwards, when we discussed it a little bit, he said, you know, if there's any shot of me having like ace queen, then it's like an okay play. He had the ace of clubs, so he has the running backdoor. Just like I had the jack of clubs, he has, you know, outs when it comes club. But yeah, I don't think that he can ever consider having full equity. I think my hand looks exactly like jacks or queens. We said it's something around the range of like 25 to 28%. So, you know, it's not like a terrible play if he assumes that I have exactly like jacks or queens. Thing is honestly, I guess it's like a decent read that I probably don't have aces or kings. I personally believe I still have those hands in my range. There's sometimes, especially kings. Do I tank as long as I did with those hands? Probably not. But I consider it for sure, because if I have aces or kings here, putting in a 4-bet here is extremely strong. And I actually don't know what I would do with aces or kings here. I think I'd go into the tank with both of them just the same, and probably flat with both of them. I've done it previously in other games. Mostly because I think it's just too strong to be 4-betting those hands in these situations. There is obviously some leveling that can occur if I do, because it looks like a squeeze spot and a re-squeeze spot. But I think I'd actually would be flatting with aces here. So anyway, yeah, like I said, I was a bit frustrated that he pulled off the move and then it got there, right? Like I don't mind that he's getting it in there with the 6-outer, or what he claimed was like a 7-outer with the backdoor clubs as equity. I haven't run the exact calculations yet in an equity calculator, but yeah, it's annoying that A, he did it, and B, that he got there instead of just breaking off. Obviously, because you know, if he breaks off, then I'm pretty happy that he pulled off this move that I think is a bit of suicide given my sizing and what's left. You know, the pot is pretty huge, and can't really consider that I'd be folding like any pairs here, and I think I just always have pairs here, 10s plus. So anyway, we lose that pot, and right off the bat, instead of the positive karmic flow happening, it's the negative side. We get stacked for the 1,000 and have to reload. So we'll be battling uphill for the rest of the session. We are now at the casino about to put in the Friday session, so we'll have to recount the rest of these hands on the drive home. Turns out I never ended up getting into the remainder of the hands from that session on my drive home. We ended up detailing the session from that day, and I forgot. Thankfully, I did write down all of the remaining hand histories in my phone, and rereading them, I actually was able to paint a vivid picture of everything that happened. So let's jump into those. I do want to finish off the remainder of the sessions that occurred right before the COVID breakout, and then we're going to jump into present day and finish off what's been going on lately. So let's finish off the rest of these hand histories. We'll have a few more days before the casino closed, and then we'll jump into present day with the app play. So in the next hand thereafter, there is a limp for 10 from a weak passive reg. I'm in the small blind with ace-10 of diamonds. I'm going to be isolating here against what I believe is a wide range. It's something that I'm just going to kind of be able to pick on. I make it 40. Now the player to my immediate left makes it 150, and it folds back to me. Obviously, ace-10 of diamonds is kind of at the bottom of my range for calling 3-bets out of position. But I've been told that this guy likes to get wild, so I think that he's going to be 3-betting significantly lighter, especially versus a late limp and an open from the small blind. Obviously, my range is going to be fairly wide, and so I think he's going to be attacking it fairly often. So I call, and we go heads up to a flop, which comes queen, jack, 7 with 2 diamonds. So I flop the nut gut shot and the diamond flush draw. I check, and after he thinks for a bit, he ends up betting 150. So now my kind of dilemma here is, obviously I'm going to be continuing, and what is my best line against what I believe is to be a perceived wide range? Obviously we can check call, try to navigate on turns and rivers out of position, or we can try to put the onus on him by check raising. Given that I think that he's going to be extremely wide here, I think the best play is to just be check raising and probably just check jamming. He's playing, I think, about 800, so check jam would be at 650 more, which is obviously a pretty significant raise in this case, and it's going to really put the onus on him to be able to make a tough call if he does have a hand like aces or kings. If I had a set of queens or jacks, I probably wouldn't just be check jamming this flop. Since it is draw heavy, maybe I would be, but I don't expect him to be folding aces or kings. That said, if I do believe that his 3-betting range here is going to be wide, by applying the pressure here, I think that's going to be the best case scenario. Also, I think a large portion of his 3-betting range is going to be comprised of ace king, and obviously ace king just really can't call off here for 100 or for 650 more. Even if he believes that I'm going to have a lot of draws here, I just don't expect him to be able to call that large of a raise with ace high. So after thinking for a bit, I jam it all in, and it's 650 more to him. He thinks for a while, ends up folding, and after the hand is completed, he ends up telling me that he has ace-king. So I like the way I played this. Obviously, he's not 3-betting as wide as I thought. He could be lying, obviously, because if he has an overpair, he's probably just going to call. So maybe he's trying to make up like some hand that he's 3-betting with that's like he's trying to pretend that he's a very good hand. I'm not really sure. But yeah, I like the way I played this. Obviously, very lucky to be able to flop a draw, as trying to play ace-10 suited out of position is going to be pretty tough, even if I do think that the guy is 3-betting me light. I think looking back on the hand, if I do believe he's 3-betting wide, then I should just be 4-bet folding, maybe to some sizing like 400 or like 370. Problem there being, if I 4-bet to 370, it's only going to be, I think, like 600 more to call. The price at that point is going to be better than 2-1, and my hand's just not really going to be a dog at those odds unless I'm facing exactly aces. So I'm going to put myself in a pretty precarious spot where I've 4-bet to a sizing in which I probably can't fold to his jam. So yeah, it's a pretty dicey spot, but I think I like the way that I played it. A few hands later, there are a couple of limps, and now the button makes it 25. I'm in the big blind with king, queen off. This is a hand that I want to be 3-betting to isolate. I think his sizing, given the couple of limps for $10, indicates a hand that he likes, but a hand that isn't particularly nutty, right? I don't expect him to be making it 2.5x with hands like aces or kings. So I want to be attacking this. I think we want to go on the larger side to ensure that we can get folds. You don't want to do something like 3x or 3.5x, because I think that's going to allow him to be able to call in position much more often. So I like for 125, 5x, try to get the limpers obviously to be folding, and the same from him. I think it's going to be much tougher for him to be calling these 3-bets to a large sizing. So anyway, I make 125, and it folds back to him. He calls. We go heads up to a flop, which comes 10-5-4 with 2 diamonds. Again, I wanted to be betting a size that's going to elicit some folds from him. So I bet 170, a little bit on the larger side. Possibly can go even a little bit larger if I really want to try to be getting folds, but we don't want to be going too large, because then obviously he's only going to be continuing with his overpairs plus. And now he just immediately rips it for $1,500. I didn't expect that to happen. Obviously, we're going to be folding, can't really be calling off here with king, queen high. That said, this is somebody that I play with regularly, so I want to get a read, and I also don't want to just be snap folding and making it look like, I'm 3-betting here with air, because obviously if I fold immediately, it means that I had no decision, which really the only hand that I had no decision with as a 3-bet would be something like ace, king. So I think for a bit, he seems pretty smiley, like he's trying to be happy. After, thinking about it for a bit, I realized that he could have some hands here like 6-7 of diamonds for an open-ended straight and flush draw. Conversely, obviously, I could also be crushed by a hand like ace queen or ace jack of diamonds. So I think for a bit, fold, and he quickly shows me the ace queen of diamonds, which obviously has us in bad shape. But it is really interesting to note, against someone that I play with regularly, that they are willing to get in 300 big blinds with the nut flush draw, which I wouldn't have really thought of. I think his snap ship on the flop is kind of indicative of this. You will see oftentimes in live poker, when someone just immediately jams, it's going to be much more likely a draw than a hand that's nutty. Like if he has a set of 10s, set of 5s, I think you're going to find most of the time people will kind of start to act, try to think about like what do they want to do with this big hand, whereas when they have a draw, they're just more likely to ship it all in there. Now in this hand, under the gun, the guy who had previously said that he had folded pocket queens opens to 60, folds to me in the cutoff with queen 10 of diamonds. I think one of the biggest mistakes you can do is pretty much telegraph your hand. We are 1,500 plus deep here, and I think that he's primarily just going to have hands like pocket queens plus, maybe pocket jacks plus, and I think I'm going to be able to outplay him post flop in a lot of spots. So I call. The small blind calls, and we go 3 ways to a flop, which comes 10-8-6 with 1 diamond. So I flop top pair and a backdoor flush draw, backdoor straight draw. The small blind checks. Now the pre-flop opener bets 120. And while I'm thinking about what I want to be doing in this spot, he says to me, "Are pocket kings any good?" When he says this, actually, I think he's being 100% honest. There was a hand earlier on where he had flopped a flush draw with 9-6 suited, turned to flush and check called me, and then on the river, when he checked to me and I was thinking about betting or checking, he says, "I have a flush, do what you want to do." I ended up checking it back and he won. So I think he's just being honest once again. So when he asks me, "Are pocket kings any good?" I kind of already have a plan on how I'm going to be able to get out of line here. So I tell him, "No, they're not," and I make the call. Small blind folds. The turn is a 9, and now he quickly checks. So the plan here is obviously just to start unloading the clip. I bet 300 with the intention of probably betting something like 3/4 pots on the river if he does in fact decide to call. Thankfully, he thinks for a bit, looks at the board and just says there's way too much out there, and mucks his cards. When he mucks his cards, one of the cards ends up flashing over and is a king. So obviously he could have just had ace king high. It's possible that I had the best hand, but I honestly believe that he did in fact have pocket kings. This hand kind of goes to show you why you really don't want to be telegraphing the strength of your hand. A lot of times you'll find novice players who are like, oh, I've got pocket aces, pocket kings. I'm going to make it a ton pre-flop, and then I'm going to be able to win. The mistake is obviously in that if anybody is a perceptive player, they're going to be able to outplay you post-flop on a variety of different textures if your raise size only indicates one specific type of hand. So, if he opens to a regular standard size here, then he could proceed and not play a big pot out of position where it becomes fairly obvious exactly what he has. In this next hand, the player from the previous pot who had jammed the ace-queen of diamonds on me opens under the gun to 25. A tight regular calls. I'm in middle position with 10-9 of hearts and elect a 3-bet to 110. I'm attacking what I believe is a fairly defined range of some small pocket pairs as well as ace-x types hands. Obviously, if the type regular ends up kind of waking up here and doing anything, I'm going to be done with the hand. It folds back to the pre-flop opener. He calls, and the tight regular in between the two of us folds. We go heads up to a flop, which comes Jack 10-7 with 2 hearts. So I flop a gut shot, middle pair, actually the straight flush draw. He checks, and I continue for 160. He thinks for a bit and calls. The turn is now an offsuit queen, and he checks. I like to check back here, try to get the showdown with my middle pair and the flush draw. I think this is a mistake. In hindsight, I think I prefer just continuing to barrel here. Try to elicit some folds from some hands like ace-jack, some middling pocket pairs. The problem obviously with the Jack-10 suited is that I block a lot of these hands that I'm trying to get to fold, like pocket nines and pocket eights, which I actually have beat anyway. So really, I think if I'd be betting this turn, it would be to target hands specifically like ace-jack, king-jack. Obviously, hands like queen-jack are not going to be folding. Ace-queen, I don't expect to fold. So that was my thought process at the time as to why I did check back. The river ends up being a brick. It's an offsuit 5, and he checks once again. At this point, I feel like I can't really be turning my hand into a bluff because I'm not entirely sure what sort of hands I would play in this manner in which I 3-bet pre-flop, bet flop, check back turn, and now bet river for value. The most likely hands that I could think of are some combinations like 2 pairs, like maybe Jack 10, Queen 10, but I think I'd just be barreling these on the turn anyway, so I'm not really sure what I'd be repping here if I decided to bet this river. I check it back, and I end up beating black pocket eights. So I knew at the time when I was thinking on the turn, like to hit an 8, that I was thinking of the exact card that I wanted to hit. So we obviously had him in pretty bad shape on this flop. In this hand, there is a limp under the gun from a really tight regular. It folds to the button. It was a weak passive regular. He makes it 45. Attorney pro in the blinds calls 45, and I'm in the straddle with ace king. Obviously, I want to be 3-betting here. I am a little bit concerned about the limp under the gun, but I think if I end up facing a 4-bet here, it's going to be an easy fold. The button and the tournament player in the blinds both have around like a $400, $450 stack, so I'm happy to get it in here for that much. So I 3-bet to 165. Thankfully, the tight regular under the gun folds. Now folds to the button, who thinks for a bit and folds. That was probably the player that I was second most afraid of, obviously, since he is weak passive. I think that he is going to have some hands here that are pocket pairs like 10s, jacks, possibly obviously like kings or aces, but everything else we're going to be flipping against and don't really mind to get it in. Now, after he folds, attorney regular thinks for a bit and calls. We go heads up to a flop, which comes king 7-3 with 2 diamonds or something very similar. He thinks for a bit and bets 85. Pretty strange for him to be donking into me. Given that there is a flush draw here, I like that I'm just going to be essentially raising to put him to an all-in decision. I think he's going to have a draw. He's going to call it off. I think if I call here, it's going to look like I have, hands that are like pocket pairs, like queens, possibly kings or aces, a hand like ace-king. I don't expect that I'm going to just be calling here very often with a hand like 10s or jacks. That said, looking back on how I played the hand, I think I actually like just calling here on the flop to keep ranges wide. Once I raise and essentially put him to an all-in decision, it's going to be pretty hard for him to continue with some bluffs, like if he himself has like 9s or 10s. I think if I just flat here, perhaps he's going to put me on hands like queens that might fold, and then he can jam the turn and I can call it off. Anyway, so I raised to about 310, putting him to an all-in decision. I think he's playing like 370, something like that. He thinks for a little bit and calls it off. The turn is a brick, the river is a brick, the flush draw does not get there, and he announces just 1 pair. I turn my hand over, and obviously it's good. In this hand, I'm in the small blind. There is a limp under the gun from a, once again, loose passive regular. There is an open to $20 from this kid who had been opening fairly wide. Now the tournament regular flats on the button. I have 10s in the small blind and elect a 3-bet to 130. Both the tournament regular and the player who had opened are playing 400 against both of them. I just don't mind getting in for 400 with the 10s, given the loose openings from the player that opened and the tournament regular flatting on the button. I think that both of them are just going to be fairly wide here. So I make it 130. The under the gun limper calls, the opener folds, and now the tournament regular calls. The flop comes 10-5 deuce with 2 spades, so we flop top set. Obviously very nice. I look over at the tournament regular and I see that his stack is about 270, so I'm thinking that I want to bet about half, so that in case the under the gun player calls and now he jams, I have the option to re-raise to be able to isolate against some possible flush draws from the under the gun player. As I'm about to do so, I decide to look at his stack to kind of get a better understanding of exactly how much it is, because I don't want to bet a little bit over half and then not be able to reopen the betting, because obviously if I do bet a little bit over half, then once he jams, I'm not going to be able to reopen the betting. So I check, and it actually seems that he maybe has like 250, 255. So I like to bet 120. The under the gun player calls 120, and sure enough, the tournament regular on the button jams his like 250, 255, something like that, which now reopens the betting. I go all in for like my 1,000 or whatever, covering the under the gun player. He has pocket jacks and obviously has to fold, because it's just really the only thing I think he can hope that I have myself is like ace king suited, ace queen suited to have a flush draw, which still the jacks aren't doing that well against. The button ends up having a flush draw. The turn is an offsuit jack and the river's a brick, so we end up holding against the flush draw. What I think is really interesting about this hand is that obviously if I ended up betting like the 135, the under the gun player would have been able to call the min raise jam. He obviously isn't going to be folding for like 120 once all that money's in there, and I would have been losing like a $2,500 pot or whatever, a $2,700 pot to him once he hits the jack on the turn. Obviously, it's a little bit of results-oriented thinking, but I think what the most important thing here is to understand what you're trying to do in all hands. I was able to notice that his stack was 260, and my plan of action was to bet half to ensure that if he does jam, I can re-isolate. Because I thought that the under the gun player oftentimes is going to have something like a flush draw if he continues, some over pairs, obviously, which are going to have some outs. So my whole goal in betting the half was to reopen the betting. So I'm really glad that I was paying attention. So I think the lesson here is obviously always be paying attention to what stack sizes are, so that whatever you do decide to do, it's going to continue from there as you had planned. Because obviously, if I had just went whimsically with 135, thinking, okay, whatever, he's got 270. Then I would have cost myself like a pretty big pot in this instance. In this next hand, there is an open and late position to 25, a call in the small blind. I'm in the straddle for $10 with 5-3 hearts, with 15 more to call. I'm getting a decent price. Obviously, 5-3 hearts is pretty much the bottom of my range, but as we know, I like to get the flops and play post-flop, so I call 15 more, and we go 3 ways to a flop, which comes Jack 7-4 with 2 diamonds. Small blind checks. I check to the pre-flop opener, who checks it back. I think when he checks it back here, he's going to have a lot of hands like ace highs and king highs that I like not to bet. I would expect that if he has pocket pairs like 10s, 9s, or 8s, he would just be c-betting this board, since it is pretty raggedy, and those hands are obviously going to gain from betting and trying to deny equity against overcards. So when he checks it back here, I do expect just to have a lot of high card hands. The turn is a 10. Now the small blind checks. I decide I'm going to start barreling here. I think that obviously when the 10 picks up, he's going to make some pairs, like if he has queen 10, ace 10, king 10. But if I barrel off twice, possibly can get those hands to fold. Also, I expect him to be able to continue with some hands like ace king, king queen, ace queen that are going to now pick up equity, and obviously are going to call at least once. So in hindsight, I probably don't like to play that much, because he's going to at least call once, and now I'm going to have to A, be able to fade those rivers, and B, just have the hope that he's not going to call down with hands that are like king 10, ace 10, queen 10. So I bet 55, and he does in fact call. The small blind now tanks and folds. The river is an offsuit 8. The flush draws miss. The only hand that really gets there is queen 9 for open-ended. Obviously, having 5 high, I'm at the bottom of my range, and I'm going to be putting a bet here. I bet 115. He thinks for a bit and ends up calling me with 5-4 of diamonds for the flop bottom pair and a flush draw, and the river bottom pair. Obviously a pretty interesting call, I think, on his part. He doesn't really beat anything unless I specifically have the draws. A lot of the draws do make pairs. I specifically have to have a hand like ace king, king queen. Yeah, I think it's a pretty interesting spot. Obviously, he does beat some open-enders, some straight draws. The one thing that I think I did incorrectly here is that when I bet this river, I'm pretty much just repping a 9. Obviously, if I have hands like Jack 10 for 2 pair, Jack 8 for 2 pair, 10 8 for 2 pair, I'm probably going to be check calling here, because he shouldn't have too many 9s in his range, and it's not a spot where I can bet for value and hope to get looked up light. So I think he was able to deduce that correctly and see that most likely my hand is going to be a lot of missed draws. That said, I think calling with bottom pair is pretty ambitious, and kudos to him, because obviously he did owe me getting to call here with bottom pair for $115 and scoop the pot. In this next hand, there is a limp from pretty much kind of an action player goofball. I decide to isolate him to 60 with Jack-8 suited. There are 2 calls from 2 regulars that I'm very familiar with, and we end up going 3 ways to a flop, which comes 6, 7, 9. It goes check to me. I think that this is probably a pretty bad flop for my exact hand range, and so I shouldn't be betting it, because if somebody raises to try to attack my perceived range, I'm going to be put in a tough spot with a hand that actually does very well in this flop. That said, it's probably about as good a flop as I can hope for Jack-8, so I decide to bet. I bet 130. The player in position now makes it 400, and the other player in the hand ends up flatting. So now it's 270 more to me with the nut open-ender. Obviously, just not a spot I'm going to be folding. I don't think raising here is really of any merit, because it's very likely that one of these 2 players is a set and just will not be folding it. So I call the 270 more, and we go to a turn of an offsuit king. The player who cold called the 400 checks. I decide to check, and now the player in position goes all in for 555. The player thereafter calls the 555, and now it's on me. The pot's, I think, about $2,400, so I'm getting a decent price, although not true odds. That said, I think we had another like $500 to $700 behind, so there are some implied odds if I hit. Not to mention, I think there are some instances here where he himself has hands like pocket 8s for an open-ender, or possibly hands like 7-8 for a pair and open-ended. So if we do end up banging off the 10, then now we have the nuts and end up getting the rest of the money in. Though I think that mathematically it's not a great call here to be calling the 554 more, I think it's just a spot where, I'm going to just call it off, getting kind of the wrong price, and hope to get there. So we call, the river is a brick, and we end up losing to pocket 6s and pocket 9s. Both of them end up flopping a set. So pretty unfortunate that we didn't get there. Obviously, this is kind of clear evidence of what happens when you open some hands like Jack-8 suited and get yourself into some tricky spots post-flop. I think the call on the flop is pretty standard. I can't really be folding for the 270 more, multi-way with money to money behind with the nut open-ender. That said, on the turn, I think that we could probably find a fold. It's just one of those spots that I personally hate, because I know that we're going to end up seeing a river since there are the 2 players all in, and if I'm banging off here, I'm going to be pretty sick to my stomach. So we end up missing, and now we're back to Stuckville. Once again, the goofball player who I've been targeting limps. I isolate to 45 with King Jack suited. It folds around now to the small blind, a reg who makes it 115. The goofball folds. And obviously I don't want to be calling with King Jack suited in 3-bet pots, because I'm going to be dominated in a lot of situations. But A, I'm in position, and B, his sizing is really small. He didn't even end up making it 3x. So I think I have a pretty clear continue here in position, playing $1,000. So I call, and the flop ends up coming King Jack 5 all spades. He continues with a bet of $130, flopping top 2 here. I think I have a pretty clear continue. Obviously, there are some situations where we're just dead against pocket kings, but I think it's much more likely that he has a hand like ace king or pocket aces. So we have a pretty clear continue. I call. I think that if the turn is a spade and he continues betting, then we have some situations where we probably have to fold, because I think it's much more likely that he's going to have a hand like pocket aces or pocket queens that have turned to flush. Anyway, the turn is a brick, and now he bets 440. We once again have a pretty clear continue. I have 340 or 350 left. I think I could probably just be jamming here, but I decided to just call, continue to keep the ranges wide. It's possible that he's fairly dead. The river is a 8, an offsuit 8. The flush does not get there. He puts me on for my 340, and I obviously call it off. And we end up cracking his pocket aces with the ace of spades, so we did have to fade that. I think if the river is a spade and he jams, I might be able to find a fold. It's possible with how much money that's in the pot, I end up just calling it off because, there's some situations where you could have some bluffs. I've seen him kind of get out of line, and his small sizing pre-flop could be a pretty indicative spot where he just has like a wide range. So I think in hindsight, what I like actually doing is just jamming the turn so that I don't have any difficult spots on the river. He's obviously, with his sizing, is just not going to be folding on the turn, and we should just shovel in the money, because let's say he has instead pocket aces without a spade, have the river as a spade, maybe he ends up check folding for his 340 for my remainder of the 340. So I think I like just getting it all in on the turn there. But anyway, obviously we suck out flopping top 2 and holding here against the pocket aces, which is nice to get us back up a little bit. And now for the final interesting hand of note, the crazy goofball limps once again. I isolate to 45 with king queen offsuit. He calls, and we go heads up to a flop, which comes to 7, 8, 9 with 2 spades. I have the king of spades. He now donks into me for 25, which he had been doing a lot. Obviously on this kind of raggedy board, I don't think I could really be raising, because he could put me in a lot of difficult situations if he decides to bet 3-bet. So I just call to see what develops. The turn is the ace of spades, giving me now the nut flush draw, and he once again donks 25. Given this sizing, I think I should just be raising here. We have the nut blocker. We can raise and then just bomb rivers. Obviously, there are some spots where he's just going to have 2 pair and is going to call off. Some turn flushes himself is going to call off. But I think I like that play much more than what I end up doing. So I end up calling. The river is now a 9, pairing the board, and he bets 50. I'm here left with king high. And given his like small bet, small bet, small bet, I think raising this river was going to look pretty strange. I'm not really sure what I'm going to be repping. I think that given the fact that he's kind of a crazy player and it looks like he has a hand that he likes, it's just not a spot that he's going to go bet, 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 and then fold to a raise unless I make some ridiculous sizing. I decide just against it, given his player profile. I don't really like this spot to bluff. Looking back in hindsight, do I like calling? It's hard to think of what hands I exactly beat. Obviously, he could have some hands, 10x hands for open-enders. Those would have to be specifically like 10-5, 10-4, which I don't expect it to be limp calling. Exactly, maybe queen 10 as well, or king 10. So there are some 10x hands that I do beat. After some thought, I just don't really think there's much merit in calling with king high on this exact board and for this sizing. I think if he bets larger on the river, I might be more apt to call with king high, but given the small sizing, I don't think he's just going to be bluffing that often. So I end up folding, and he shows me the queen 10 offsuit. Womp womp, he got me. Obviously, if I just raise this turn, he's going to be calling. Maybe the river just goes check, check, and I win. There's a chance that I decide to just go for it on the river by betting, and we win against the queen high as well. But I just didn't really like my line here. I don't really like my passive play. Obviously, I should be attacking him. Other than that, I think once I just call turn, I don't think that I can really be raising river to be repping any credible hands. Anyway, that's the last interesting hand that we end up playing in the session. We end up booking a $447 win, which I believe is my 4th win in a row, given that we had just gotten back to playing regularly. So pretty excited. Things are going great. Can't really be complaining, except for the fact that little do we know that the coronavirus is about to shut down the casino just a week away. So that's all for now. Casinos around here are still in fact closed, so I've been focusing on playing on apps. If you are looking to play some pot limit Omaha, please reach out to me on Instagram. I've actually found a couple of really good games with very low rake, which are the things that I've had the biggest issue with in the past. So I'm very happy that I've been able to find those. I've been doing really well. As I mentioned, I will be focusing on those in future vlogs. And otherwise, please go check out pokerrags.us and support the channel. As I mentioned, our anti-knit poker apparel is now on there. You have a few different options. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.